Let's move into permanent residency. In the UK, in the US, sorry, um, I think most recently it fits in really well in this area is to talk about the presidential proclamation that came out. It obviously gained a lot of traction, and uh, fortunately, the tweet that came out where President Trump announced that he would be doing something to impact US immigration actually was a lot scarier than the presidential proclamation that was actually put out that was very limited in scope. Marc, would you be able to go through some of the kind of impacts of the presidential proclamation?
Sure, and as you said, I mean, I think when it first came out, there was a lot of anxiety and panic among the immigration community because the tweet essentially said he was planning to sign an executive order that was going to suspend all U.S. immigration without providing any details on what that meant. However, a couple of days later, when that presidential proclamation was actually issued, and you kind of dig into it, it was much more limited in scope than I think most people had anticipated. So really, it only applies to individuals who are currently outside the United States. So anybody in the United States is not impacted whatsoever, and it's also only applies to individuals who are in the process of applying for permanent resident or immigrant visa status. And so for individuals who already have immigrant visa status, whether they're inside the U.S. or outside the U.S., they are not impacted. Individuals who are inside the U.S. but want to still file applications moving towards immigrant status, which would be an I-140 application or an I-45 adjustment of status application, those applications can continue to be filed. Those individuals are not impacted. So the only individuals that are impacted would be someone who is outside the U.S., was in the process of filing for an immigrant visa, was waiting for an appointment for an immigrant visa, and those appointments are now going to be delayed for as long as this proclamation is in order. Now, even with that, and if you try to look at the scope of how many people that involves, certainly it does involve some people, and that means their ability to get a green card and come into the United States, whether it's in an employment-based category or family-based category, they may be delayed. However, in the grand scheme of immigration, that's a relatively small number. And the other issue is that there were a lot of exemptions included in this proclamation as well. So even if you fall under the class of people who are impacted by this, if you are a person who is married to, if you're applying for a green card based on being married to a U.S. citizen, or you can show that you were applying under an employment-based category, but you're coming for essential work in the United States, so maybe you're a physician or a registered nurse, you're still going to be exempted from this proclamation despite those limitations. So for right now, it does impact a certain number of people for the next 60 days. The other thing to keep in mind is right now, most of the consulates, well, all of the consulates are closed except for emergency services. So those individuals' applications weren't moving forward anyways. So I think this is we're only going to start seeing an impact from this once consulate starts opening up. Let's say if they open up in the next 30 days, then this order would still prevent some people's applications from moving forward if they were covered by this proclamation. What we don't know then also is, will this proclamation be extended? It did leave the ability to extend it further if the president thought it was necessary. So that's one thing we're going to continue to watch. And I think there are some fears among some immigrant advocates in the United States that some of these limitations were the exact limitations that the president was looking to accomplish in some proposed legislation several months back that did not make it through Congress. But this accomplishes the same goal. And there's some that fear that he'll just continue to extend these and essentially arrive at the same result. The other thing we're watching very closely is buried at the very end of this proclamation was one paragraph that said also that the president was directing the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Labor to study non-immigrant visa categories and make it and try to see if there's any other actions that need to be taken with respect to those categories to help not only prevent the spread of the pandemic, which was one of the the reasons this proclamation was put forth, but also to protect American jobs. That was the other reason as the basis for this proclamation, was to not have as many immigrants to come in to compete with U.S. workers in a time of high employment. And so the president, as part of this proclamation, has directed the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Labor to look at programs like H-1B and L-1 to see if there's any changes that might need to be made there to protect the U.S. workforce. And we're watching that very closely because that if they were to make some changes there, that really could potentially grind some elements of the U.S. Work visa programs to a halt.
Right, absolutely. I think what's really important is you still can apply for green cards in many other different avenues, and you can use this time now to put the groundwork in filing Form I-140 and adjustment of statuses if you're eligible to. And larger changes, I mean, if you break out the permanent residency process in the US, there's two broad approaches. One is the perm process, which is where you test the labor market. The other would just be through the non-perm process. If you have an EB1, you fall into one of those categories, either you're a manager or executive, or you have extraordinary ability. In terms of the perm context itself, there really haven't been too many changes. The Department of Labor are now issuing labor certifications electronically, which is great news. So you can actually file Form I-140 a bit quicker using the electronic labor certification. And again, this is something that hopefully USCIS and Department of Labor will allow going forward. I think it's a great change. And I think something to be really cautious of during this time is how layoffs may impact your perm. So if there have been any layoffs within 6 months of filing the labor certification itself, that's something you'd want to take into consideration before you file the labor certification. You may want to have a look at whether you have complied with all the layoff requirements in offering that position to anyone that's recently laid off, or maybe delay the filing of the labor certification. And then in terms of other changes, the USCIS and Department of Labor have come out with some guidances to be more flexible. So they've extended the 180-day perm recruitment window by 60 days, and also there's the extension of the notice of filing window as well, again by 60 days. They've also given extensions to respond to certain Department of Labor inquiries as well. So there has been some flexibility. It's still really important during this time that you're monitoring all your expiration dates and due dates. The Department of Labor are notoriously unforgiving if you do miss those dates. So being really precise about timings. If you can file your labor certification within that original 180-day window, it's still recommended and still best practice to do that. Really only relying on these flexibilities as a last resort if there have been any changes. And then if we look at the non-perm based side, Ellis Porter, we have this great team, and I often refer to them as the Avenger team, the high-skilled immigration team. They really focus on the extraordinary ability visas, manager and executive visas. They are still open. You can file those. Those are the types of cases that do not require you to test the labor market prior to filing. So you can skip the labor market test, file the I-140 directly, and in some cases, even the adjustment of status. And so USCIS is still accepting those green card applications in those EB1 categories as well, and there's also the EB2, sometimes with the NIW applications. So there is still a lot of work that can be done in the permanent residency world. Marc, do you have any additions in the permanent residency world?
Not necessarily an addition, but I had a question for Rahul. So as we were talking about, some elements of this presidential proclamation, are I guess can be viewed as, protectionist in nature. I'm assuming the unemployment rates in the UK are also on the rise. Is there any push there with the UK immigration laws to implement anything that's a little bit that could be viewed as protectionist for the UK labor force?
Well, at the moment, as you rightly pointed out, unemployment is very high, and there are a lot of layoffs happening, and people are being furloughed. There's a furlough scheme in the UK, which is you are not allowed to work, but the government pays you a certain amount of money every month. I think it's for the next 3 months they're offering it, but it might be again extended depending on when the lockdown ends. So apart from that, I don't see anything else happening. Immigration is going as normal. You can still file for work permit applications. You can still file for indefinite leave to remain applications. There's a certain bias towards the NHS, given that they were very active in controlling the pandemic. So NHS workers are definitely being given some priority and preference. Their applications are being done for free. And there are talks right now that anybody in the UK who's an NHS might be given indefinite leave to remain automatically. So that's what's happening here. But again, our government hasn't taken any immediate or any extreme stance as far as migrant workers are concerned. So everything is as normal as it should be.
Okay, great. In terms of any other changes in the permanent residency law in the UK, are there any other aspects that anyone should note about?
Well, like I said earlier, UK is still allowing indefinite leave to remain applications, and a couple of conditions which have to be met is that you have to pass life in the UK test, which is mandatory. You have to meet the English language requirement. There's a minimum salary threshold, which is 35,800 for this year. That has to be met, and you have to meet the absence requirements, which is 180 days. So that's all there. Nothing has been done away with. But what's happened is that if you're unable to book the English language test or life in the UK test, we are recommending people still submit the application and explain the reason in a covering letter why they couldn't get the test done. And I'm sure the Home Office will use their discretion. They may not approve the application straight away, but they may wait for the applicants to go and give the test, get the result, and then send it across later, at a later date to the Home Office. There used to be a priority service in the UK for ILR applications, which has been suspended temporarily. And the processing time at the moment is 6 months. This is, as I said, temporary. It might definitely, I think it will go back to priority service once the lockdown ends. What the Home Office is suggesting is that you must submit your application before your visa expires. However, biometric centers are closed, and people can only give biometrics once they open up. So there's a delay as far as applications are concerned, but everything is normal.
Okay, great. And it seems similar, I mean, there's similar issues in the US as well, but again, going back to the same theme of putting in the groundwork, when everything does reopen, there obviously may be a longer processing time. So if you're able to get some of the groundwork done pending the biometrics, maybe that could be a good solution for a lot of individuals, get their ILR applications in, and then once everything does reopen, get the biometrics to supplement their application.